Welcome to Supply Chain Talks. My name is Kristian Mortensen. I'm a Senior Director, Global Partnership and Alliances at project44, and today I'm also your host for Supply Chain Talks. project44 has hand-curated a strong partner network in order to extend and enable the best possible customer experience. During spring and early summer, we welcome you to our partner series, Supply Chain Talks. These conversations touch on current developments in global supply chains and the world of logistics. Today, we possibly welcome Mr. SP van Houten to Supply Chain Talks. SP is Vice President, Industry Solutions at 09. SP, I'm very pleased to have you join.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction, Kristian, and thanks for having me, of course. It's my pleasure to be here today, and yeah, I'm looking really forward to our conversation.
Thanks, SP. From memory, you have a 13-year consulting career at both Accenture and Deloitte in supply chain strategy and transformation, perhaps with a strong interest in planning and control tower topics. So now you continue this journey at 09. My feeling is that you are a very strong believer that digital platforms can change the game around planning and execution. What has changed in the last 15 years in this area? And perhaps what has not changed?
Yeah, excellent question, right? So I believe that digital platforms often in itself really start to allow us to collapse the traditional linear supply chains into a more agile, interconnected network that unlocks actually new value across the digitized nodes, right? And this provides new opportunities for example, value creation by digitizing and connecting traditional nodes. For example, what we're seeing is that planning becomes, for example, much more synchronized, right? We see smart factories come to life that allow for better service levels through new levels of speed and agility and closer connected, and which are closer connected to the end consumer ask. I also see is more intelligent ways in the areas of, for example, supply through better capabilities around visibility and collaboration. So what I think is what is profoundly changing is the ability to create transparency across the network, to become more proactive in using, for example, predictive alerts, make better and more holistic decisions beyond the borders of traditional functional silos. What I also believe has not changed, to answer your question, is the continuing need for skilled resources to actually make all of this work. Right? So while the roles themselves may be changing, and they are actually, of course, changing, the general trends that we see remains that all of this will only really work if you have the right people with the right skills and the right talent to also sustain these, say, more modern technologies as such.
Talent is a good one to pick up on. SP, I recently had the pleasure of joining the 09, to say it correctly, AIM 10X global event. I saw a lot of 09 talent there. I was really impressed. It seemed you had, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 participants on this 3-day event. The event was far bigger and I would also say more interesting than the standard in the industry. Tell me a bit more about the background for this event.
Yeah, thanks. And we actually had close to 5,000 participants in the end, so that was an awesome success. But the event and our broader AIM 10X network is all around bringing together change agents in the world of revenue management, supply chain management, finance, and IT, who are digitally transforming planning and decision-making processes. Right? So it's very much around sharing of practical ideas, best practices, and learnings. And this in this particular case for the AIM 10X global event. So it was really about showcasing how global enterprises are meeting the complexity of the digital age with speed and confidence, and bring that then to actually the participants as such.
Let's try to compare a little bit to golf. The game of golf consists of, say, 2 distinct parts. In the long game, you try to reach the green with a few shots as possible. In the short game, the goal is to place the ball in that little cup. And each phase really requires different tools and a distinct way of thinking. The same is true for supply chain planning. Sales and operations planning focus on tactical horizon from, let's say, 3 out to maybe 24 months, and has completely different objectives then sales and operations execution, which covers the near term. In 2009, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had this next-gen sales and operations execution control tower capability, and I'm really interested to know how does that work and how does it impact the industry?
Sure. So what we see is that next-gen S&OP or IBP, as we call it, is focusing indeed on integrating plans across the value chain. Right? So we really talk about sales, finance, supply chain, make better decisions on a more tactical level or tactical horizon, and typically starting indeed from months 3 and onwards, right? The S&OP and control tower capability is then actually very much focused on executing these tactical decisions and making the right short-term calls to optimize value, right? So if, for example, as demand changes or as supply gets disrupted, you need to course correct and make a decision on the short term. The next-gen S&OP or IBP capability is then also fed actually by the outputs of the S&OE cycle or capability to continuously learn and make better tactical decisions. Then the control tower or S&OE capability benefits from this better inputs from the next-gen S&OP to optimize then the ability to execute. So all in all, what you really see is that these two capabilities really reinforce each other, complement each other, and drive what we have seen, significant value creation for our customers.
Thanks, SP. I think our customers and your customers, our joint customers, global companies are transforming, or at least they're trying to transform from often maybe slow, siloed supply chain revenue and financial planning to real-time integrated business planning. How does 09 support this movement, and how does real-time visibility factor into this, let's call it modernization journey?
Right, and I think this is also an excellent question. And 09 is actually designed with this transformation in mind, right? So we are a cloud native platform that acts as the digital brain, as we call it, of companies using knowledge-powered analytics, planning, and learning. And in a simple way, right, the 09 platform actually consists of three layers. With at the bottom, we have a layer that we call the enterprise knowledge graph, where we're able to ingest and connect data coming from many different sources. For example, structured, such as ERP, but also it could be unstructured, for example, from Excel spreadsheets. Then we connect the dots and, similar to the human brain, actually create insights and knowledge as more data gets fed into it, right? On top of this connected data or the enterprise knowledge graph, we run our analytics, for example, for say commercial planning, demand planning, or specifically for supply chain optimization. And finally, then the third layer, and very important, is really around supporting the actual decision-making processes, right? And here you see the core of these processes come together in the platform in a seamless way. And so we see revenue management processes, decision-making, we see demand forecasting, we see supply chain management, and all of these are brought together by true integrated business planning. So in short, 09 is actually front and center of this movement of enabling then true next-gen integrated business planning. Now, to your second point, right? So real-time visibility, and this is also core to this vision, right? It's around understanding what is happening at customers, at suppliers, whether that's tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3, at your own plants, at distribution centers, as you need these insights, right? So you don't have to wait for them as such. Then you use this real-time visibility to, for example, anticipate constraints, demand supply constraints, to work the problem, run scenarios, collaborate on the outputs, and share that information in the actual decision as such. So this is really how we see 09 fulfilling this promise as such.
Thank you, SP. And let's try to look a little bit at the broader outside world. In a way, you can say, just when the global supply chains were recovering from the impact, or trying to recover from the impact of the global pandemic, then we got this other setback with the grounding of the megaship in the Suez Canal. And that once more showed us how fragile global supply chains really are and how interconnected they are. How do you see events like this impact yourself, but also more importantly, your customers' plans regarding investments and modernizing their operations?
Yeah, and I think here is to the extent that COVID-19, right, the pandemic didn't already make clear that supply chains are important. I think it's clear that they are the backbone for successful business operations, right? And I think the Ever Given has just given another nice push in that direction, as does, for example, the current challenges around having also enough supplies of computer chips is another one where, for example, our car manufacturers are struggling a bit. But the overall notion that we still see is that often we come across a setup at our clients that where internally we see a lot of the data actually resides in many different systems, right? With different master data hierarchies, a variety of Excels being used, and so on and so forth. We also see that organizations are set up to actually function much more in silos from a process, performance, but also technology perspective. And meetings then, for example, S&OP, are more around sharing of information than actual decision making as such. And externally, we see that it's not easy to work with extended partners, right? And share basic information, for example, around demand, around your capacities, around PO commitments, etc. And share this especially also across multiple tiers. Now, moving forward, what we clearly see is a trend where increasingly companies are getting more serious about also replacing their planning systems, right? And everyone in the industry knows that SAP APO will be sunsetted, although that date gets pushed back on a regular basis, but it will be sunsetted at some time. So, and as most as these systems are also based on technologies that was developed, say, around 20 or more years ago, and they're realizing that there's a whole new set of possibilities out there that you can go and make use of, provided you are cloud native, and as we are able, and to also run analytics at scale. And in that perspective, there are some key topics that we're discussing. For example, creating visibility end to end, right? And what we mean here is really going from consumer all the way back to third-tier suppliers, for example. Identifying constraints as they happen, or even better, predict them before they actually happen. Work the problem using, for example, pre-configured resolution scenarios. Collaborate on options, then decide and share the decision to then execute. So we're actually seeing quite a lot of an uptake in discussions around visibility, ability to run scenarios, and how this can actually then help modernizing operations and the planning thereof often in itself.
O9 is definitely known as a supply chain innovation partner for some of the world's most advanced companies, which was so clear in your big event to see who stepped up of your customers to speak there. Can you share some of those projects that you work on, business cases?
Yeah, sure, and obviously we'll keep it anonymous for these reasons, but I'm happy to do so. Right? So some recent examples that I've been involved in, and one is around for what we call AI/ML driver-based forecasting. Right, so some trends that we're seeing in the marketplace, and I'm going a bit into my core industry, CPG, is that we see shopping behavior is changing. Right? So trips are going to the stores are down, units per trip are up. We also see an online shift that's definitely accelerating, and this was, of course, helped by COVID-19 as well. So what we're actually discussing with our customers then is are they really connecting leading indicators of demand with their internal enterprise data, right? And is that a challenge for them or not? And typically what we see is they reside on what we call lagging data, which is basically your historical order patterns as such. Are they currently forecasting, for example, processes on a weekly, monthly cycle and using statistical forecasting methods? Are their forecasts actually causing issues and friction between finance, sales, and supply chain, and are also not really sure what they should be using in terms of data for ML AI forecasting? So that's kind of the conversations we initially have with our customers. So what I've done with a few clients now is to really work with them, what we call setting up these driver-based AI/ML models, right? Where we use also our market knowledge data to improve forecast accuracy. And at the same time, and I think that's very important, also demystify the use of ML, right? So for a lot of people, this is still a black box, right? But the way how we approach it is really demystifying it, and planners can understand the different drivers of the data that in the end is used to create the forecast, understand the importance of that, and have a transparent conversation on those drivers. So that's just one of the examples. Another good example is what we call this next-gen IBP, and we already touched upon that. And here I've worked recently with a global food and beverage company, specifically around improving their S&OP processes. What they were faced with was pretty much a situation where the current S&OP process was not functioning as it should. So some of the pain points were around data residing in many different systems, both structured as well as many, and I have to say many Excel spreadsheets, very cumbersome and highly manual intensive activities in between S&OP meetings. For example, to prepare the demand review, they had to collate all kinds of information. The supply review, again, they had to run scenarios off system and so on and so forth. And in their own way, they felt it was very much more around sharing information than actual decision making, which is the whole objective of S&OP as such. So we worked with them to, first of all, identify all the data sources, and we got to about 30 different inputs from 5 different systems, then understand how they were using the data in today's world, right, and ways of working. Then we actually worked with them to build the user stories and the next-gen workflows, configured these on the online platform, and in their own words, right, it was really a truly amazing experience for them, where in the first time they could now see all this data coming together in one platform and make actually focus much more on actual decision making than just sharing information as such. So what it did for them is it improves quality of decision making, as well as they can do it at a much higher pace as such, which is what they need in today's world. Now we're also having ongoing work, for example, around control tower S&OP and integrating promotion planning with overall revenue management and supply planning. So these are just a few of the examples where I'm personally involved with at the moment.
Thank you, SP. Let's round off with one last question. I read a recent Gartner report that suggests that 57% of CEOs are planning on redeveloping or upgrading their supply chains to better adapt to the demands of the current supply chain industry. Have you seen this on your end?
Yeah, definitely, right? So, and again, I'll zoom a bit in on my core focus industry, right? CPG, FMCG, and I think there's a few trends that are clearly visible, right? So one is around really an increasing need to get closer to the end consumer, right? Second, on the back of this is there's a trend to become much more customer centric. So for example, having the ability to have more tailored portfolios, product portfolios, but also different ways of servicing your customers. And I'm talking about different channels, but also service level agreements and so on. And on the back of this one, we also be more responsive, right? So, and overall, we're also seeing as ongoing conversations driven by the pandemic as well on reshoring, more local regional sourcing, etc. And these trends have a clear impact on the supply chain. For example, how do you set up your distribution? Do you want a direct to consumer channel? And increasingly we see actually CPGs moving into this direction, and not only for the higher end segments as such, but also how do you plan for more rapidly changing product portfolios? How do you execute this from a production perspective, from a planning perspective, and how do you actually increase agility without necessarily increasing your capex investments? Then how do you create the visibility, right? Obviously, with extended partners and collaborate with them. How do you actually want to keep your own plans, or are you going to follow an asset-light strategy? So all in all, it asks for a supply chain setup that's much better tuned to reacting faster and more efficiently to changing demands and adjusting your supply setup in a more agile way. So this is what we're definitely seeing in the industry.
SP, thank you for joining Supply Chain Talks. Thank you for sharing all these insights. It was really interesting, but we are running out of time. But I know you and me and our joint colleagues will continue this conversation. So thank you very much, and I wish you a continued really nice day.
Thank you, Kristian, and thanks for having me again.
Thank you.